The entire article will be like, we're trying really hard to find the crypto angle, and we haven't found it yet. The candidates have no statements. They don't know what a Bitcoin is. There's a crypto angle. We're still looking. And it's like, no, like that was...
People aren't taking you at your word?
People aren't taking me at my word, and I understand that.
It's Tuesday, November 15, 2022, and welcome back to GoodFellows, a Hoover Institution broadcast examining social, economic, political, and geopolitical concerns. I'm Bill Whalen. I'm a Hoover Institution Distinguished Policy Fellow, and I'll be your moderator today, joined as usual by two of our GoodFellows, the economist John Cochrane and the geostrategist Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. They are Hoover Institution Senior Fellows. We're shy one GoodFellow this week. Niall Ferguson will not be joining us, but in his place, I think John and H.R. might even say it's an improvement on the show. We're joined by the one and only Kim Strassel. Kim is the Wall Street Journal's Potomac Watch columnist. She's also a regular panelist on a podcast bearing the same name. I listen to that show religiously. You should too. It's 30 great minutes on what's going on in the nation and the world. What else do you need to know about Kim Strassel? She's an Alaskan. We can talk a little bit about that. Kim, welcome to GoodFellows.
Oh, it is an honor to be here, although I could never live up to Neil's reputation. But it's like I said, it's cool to be a good fellow for an hour.
Okay, we're going to have to cut that out of the show. That's the last thing Neil needs to hear.
And we're hoping, Kim, we could talk about Russia too, because I don't know, you might be able to even see Russia from.
You know what? I don't have that view. Weirdly, like from where I am, I actually went up to the Bering Sea, up to Nome, and you couldn't even see it from there.
I was waiting for that joke, and I thought it was going to be a half an hour.
Exactly. Very good. So, Kim, I last saw you in Wyoming, of all places, and I remember the conversation drifting into the fact that you own a pair of Oculus glasses, if I'm not mistaken. I mention this because the last GoodFellows we had as a guest Tyler Cowen, the esteemed economist, and my sense was that the panel did not really care for the metaverse. Virtual reality was not its cup of tea. So, Kim, I'm giving you one good minute here to sell John and HR on the virtues of virtual reality.
Okay, first of all, have you guys actually even tried it?
No.
Oh man, come on! How can you miss it if you haven't tried it? So my youngest child has an Oculus VR, and it is the coolest thing ever. And I literally wait for her to go to school so that I can go use it when she's not around.
So I've been in lots of battle simulations in mock-up tanks and Bradleys. So maybe I've been in synthetic environments in training, but not for fun.
Yeah, except for that you'd have to measure that right against the real deal. So, it probably never lives up, right? Whereas some of the games I play on VR, I can promise you, I would never get the real deal.
Kim, let me ask you sort of where we went. Two questions. One, there seems to be a separation here. What is useful for business productivity and what's useful as a gaming platform? And on the gaming platform end, we sort of went, there's an addictiveness to the thing on the cell phone. You never say, I'm going to go waste an hour and a half on Twitter. You just pull it out. Whereas you really have to say, well, I'm going to waste an hour and a half playing video games. So, is a video game platform really going to take over the world? Or is the case for this, productivity software, the kinds of things that the internet has really done for us?
Yeah, I actually totally agree with you on that. I can't actually imagine using that VR for anything useful other than playing games. I mean, the one other thing you can do is, I think that there's some lifestyle aspects to it. Like they have some really quite interesting exercise programs you can use now where you can put yourself in an indifferent environment while you're doing yoga or whatever it is, train with someone else. I think that there's some elements like that, but business, I don't really see it. It's fun. And I mean, if you're a kid and you're going to sit around playing a regular video game or you're going to put that on, it's just more fun to put that on.
I can see some training like flight simulators, battle simulators, stuff like that is useful, but that's not a take on the world. And a lot of tech works on the it's okay principle. Zoom is not perfect, but it's okay. We still do reply all email. Terrible technology, but it's kind of simple and okay. So let's say today they have
I have a bad vision of GoodFellows where John and HR are wearing Oculus glasses and doing yoga. I don't know if that's going to get clicks or not, guys. So we got to try.
I can't do yoga.
I would tune in to watch you guys do that.
If I do yoga, I'm just feared that I'm going to have to be carried out in one of those positions. I'm just going to get stuck in it.
We can appreciate your coming on today because this is a busy day for you as a Potomac watcher in this regard. The House Republicans are meeting right now. Last I checked, Kim, they have 217 seats. I think there are 14 seats still out there. So if they get 1 out of 14, If they can't get 1 out of 14, they need to give it up. But let's assume they get at least 218, 219, 220. You choose the number. Let's also assume Kevin McCarthy is the speaker next January. In what form, we don't know, because what they're doing today, they're voting on how they're going to run committees, how they're going to do the rules committee, which decides what goes to the floor. You could have an empowered Kevin McCarthy, a somewhat emasculated Kevin McCarthy. You'll write brilliantly about this, I imagine, in the next few days. But there's a question moving forward, Kim, about what House Republicans are going to do here. If McCarthy can keep his numbers in line, he can pass legislation. Anything that he hails as transformative is certainly dead on arrival with Chuck Schumer in the Democratic Senate. It's two-way traffic. Anything that Chuck Schumer and his fellow Democrats do is dead on arrival in the House. Kim, what is going to be done in Washington in the next 2 years other than just investigation after investigation?
Well, nothing, and some gridlock can actually be healthy. By the way, I'm actually welcoming a little bit of gridlock after the blowout spending that we have had in the last couple of years. The most important thing that a McCarthy House can do is simply say no to any more super bad progressive ideas. So I think everyone can rest easy. We're not about to have 6 new entitlement programs, for instance, that cost $6 trillion. That's a breathe a sigh of relief moment there. I would warn everyone that does not mean that there will not be spending. And in fact, I remain quite worried about this, because if the Democrats have done anything particularly well the last 2 years, it's been inviting all of the big spender Republicans to join them in lots of projects like infrastructure spending or the CHIPS bill to send stuff back to their states. So you're going to see a lot of efforts at that, and that might happen as well. I am worried about the investigations. And I'd like to ask you guys a question about this too, but I just saw Newt Gingrich talking about this, and his advice was to Republicans to do a 90-10 split. Spend 90% of your time on stuff that really matters to Americans and in governing. Spend 10% on oversight, which is, by the way, that's the thing I wanted to throw to you guys. I prefer that word because that's what Congress is meant to do, is provide oversight of agencies and in the purpose that it informs their legislative intent. I worry, you guys can tell me what you think and what you see coming from this House, that in the past 4 years in particular, Congress has instead been positioning itself more as a quasi-investigatory agency, something like federal law enforcement, which is just not meant to be. I think the purest expression of that was a January 6th committee, and it's kind of referral after referral to the Justice Department for some sort of federal enforcement action or indictments. And I would rather myself see the House get back to doing some of America's business. Yes, there's some questions to be answered, but if they do that full time, I think they're wasting an opportunity. What do you guys think?
I agree with you entirely, and let me expand. The Republicans, this was not the red wave, and I'm actually very optimistic. This was the best thing for them. They need to face the fact that the American public doesn't think of them as ready to govern. There is actually a Republican program with a commitment to America. Nobody talked about it, nobody campaigned on it. Getting rid of Trump and that whole business is important. So they didn't deserve to win, because what is their alternative? It needs to be clear. Well, here's a chance. Bring Congress back to regular order. Yes, you could pass a bunch of bills. They're not going to get through now, but then a bunch of very well-crafted bills that we're campaigning on. 2024, give us the Senate, give us the president. Bing, bing, bing. You know what you're going to get. That would be useful. There will be investigations, right? Are we going to judicialize politics and just start investigating and impeaching everyone? Or now there is a useful investigations. What the heck is going on with the administrative agencies? Right. That is a lot of the damage is happening. Spending, yeah. Apparently, this president now can just pass an executive order and spend $1 trillion if it feels like it. Well, Congress can get back a little bit on that question too. Now, are they going to do it? Is this the time? Can they sit down and say, this is the time for us to show we are the responsible regular order. We're ready to go. We're ready to govern. Give us a chance in 2024. Or is it going to be political noise? And that's a good question. I think the first test is going to come, like you said, on spending. And there's going to be the usual up against the debt limits, which we should talk about a little more, but I won't extend my comments right now. And then are we just going to blow out spending because we don't want the debt limit and so forth? Or are we going to take a principled approach? No, we are the House. The one thing we got is spending starts here and spending starts here.
Hey, sure.
Yeah, Kim, I have a question. Like, don't you have some hope though for some of these committees that have been stood up by Leader McCarthy? Like, there's one on military readiness that I just joined. So I hope it's worthwhile. As well as others are looking at really the strength of our economy. I mean, I think that the war in Ukraine, I think, has revealed some big vulnerabilities. And as we're speaking, I don't know if you've heard this yet. Even Russian missiles have landed in Polish territory. So I think we are underinvested in defense. We have a bow wave of defense modernization that we have not really addressed. We have capacity issues in our forces, and of course, we need a capable military to deter conflict, vis-a-vis China, but also to respond to this ongoing war in Europe, as well as threats from the Islamic Republic of Iran, who's intensified its proxy war recently and is perfecting its drone missile strike complex. And then, of course, Kim Jong-un lately is like, hey, what about me? And he's firing more missiles and saying that they're a rehearsal for a preemptive attack on South Korea and Japan. So, I mean, I do think some important work needs to be done on defense. How about energy security? Another pipeline just blew up today as well. Clearly, I think Russia, again, using that for coercive purposes and to affect the West's will broadly. And then supply chain resilience. I know you're not a fan of the CHIPS Act, but I do think some element of economic statecraft is necessary now because of how vulnerable our supply chains have become to single points of failure, like mainly in China. So can there be some good work done? I mean, those three areas you would think, I mean, that those issues should be nonpartisan, right?
Yeah, and Kim, what HR is getting at is that there are two kinds of investigations, I think. One is really kind of the politics of vindictiveness and vendettas, and the other one is trying to be forward. I mean, for example, you look at doing an investigation of the FBI, and that'll get into the Russia hoax. But let's say there's an investigation into Anthony Fauci and the public health apparatus. You'll have great fun bringing forward Fauci and embarrassing him with 1,001 things that he said wrong. But really, I think, Kim, the more salient conversation is what happens the next time we face a terrible pandemic? What do we do different? What do we do better? And I think this is part of the message of last Tuesday as well, Kim, that those candidates who went out, Republican candidates, and really like Donald Trump kind of bathed in, bitterness in the last, 4 years, they got kicked to the curb.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And that is the soundest advice, which is go and find out what's going on at the FBI. Okay. We've had a whole bunch of FBI agents that have come forward reportedly to the House as whistleblowers with some very big concerns about partisan operations happening at the highest levels of the FBI. What's happening at the border? What do we need to get under control down there so that Congress can begin to have a serious discussion about some sort of immigration program going forward? There's all kinds of really important questions, but if you are going to instead, make it about the agencies, make it about the policy, don't make it about the individuals involved. This is what Democrats did the last 4 years, whether they went after Bill Barr, whether after they were going after Don McGahn, they just, I think Americans kind of sick of this. And by the way, HR, I hear this all the time. I can't agree with you more that our lack of military readiness is so scary, and that we have got what I am told by people who know far more about this than I do, and you would know far more too, is that we need to not only do a major catch up, but we need to do it in like a 5-year period. Like it needs to be soon. And this is one thing that worries me about the spending question, which is one reason we are hurting at the moment, is because of the way that sequester back in the Paul Ryan days was put in place, and how much it hurt military funding. And Republicans are going to come in, they're already vowing that they want to sort of watch spending. That's fine, great, but don't do it at the expense of military funding. And by the way, that by necessity means you are going to have to shut the taps on domestic spending if you want to be able to do both of those agendas. I don't know how much you worry about that, but.
Yeah, I do worry about it, especially now as inflation is going up and service on the debt goes up. And, and of course, non-discretionary spending is through the roof. And the biggest, discretionary spending is military, but that's not the budget. That's not the debt problem, is not.
I meant domestic discretionary spending. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I am concerned about it. And, I actually, Kim, Hoover has a really good program ongoing under the direction of the economist, Michael Boskin, on the defense budget process and really trying to make this a matter of urgency for all Americans. I know, eyes glaze over when you talk about like the budget process, but hey, if you don't reform,
I geek out. I love it.
But the lack of multi-year budgeting, and then also because of pressures on the budget, every year, year after year, we pledge in the budget to buy the max allocation we can of ammunition, for example, or of missiles and so forth. Then in budget execution, that gets brought down to the minimum every year. So estimates now, Kim, are if there was a major war, maybe over Taiwan, right, with China or something, that our Pacific fleet could maybe expend all of its ammunition in 18 to 24 hours. We should learn from Ukraine. Russia fired more munitions in the first couple of months of that war than all the munitions we fired in 20 years of war between Iraq and Afghanistan. So we have real capacity issues. And then companies, they don't want to open more production lines unless they have the security of a multi-year budget and some degree of predictability. So we really have to fix this budgeting and procurement system. And you're so right. I mean, this, the Budget Control Act and the sequestration issues associated with that really hurt us. And because we couldn't buy new stuff, we couldn't buy new, better weapons, it made us maintain older weapons longer at a higher cost. So there were a lot of really incentives to address within the budget making process. And I mean, I hope that everyone recognizes, hey, we've got to take this on as a matter of urgency.
Right. Kim, you mentioned Newt Gingrich a minute ago. So Newt came into office in 1995 as Speaker, having picked up 54 House seats, 230 seats in his caucus. He was on the cover of Time magazine, hailed as the most powerful man in Washington. He had a Republican Senate. He had a Democratic president more than willing to play ball because Bill Clinton was running for his life at that point. Kevin McCarthy is looking at maybe 219 seats. That's a net gain of 7. The word underachievement is on top of him. You talk to House Republicans. Kim, what sense do you have that they want to engage in what we might agree is adult behavior here? In other words, take the high road and not the low road on investigations.
So I think that a lot of the new members that are coming in definitely feel that way. And the reason is because if you were out there on the campaign trail at all, they were hearing the same thing I was hearing, which was that that's what voters want to see happen. Yeah, they do want some answers to some questions, but they fundamentally want Republicans to go and do the people's business of governing. And so you're going to have new members. Look, I think the bigger arguments, I think, in my mind, you're always going to have a couple of folks out there in the raucous caucus who want to impeach, who want to, constant. I think the bigger tensions are going to be policy tensions, and that's going to be McCarthy's main issue that he has to deal with, is that not everybody wants to go impeach Joe Biden, but there is quite a big divide, and a notable divide over how people view about how you should handle the debt limit. And whether or not you should ever have any omnibus appropriations bills anymore. The big fight over the next couple of weeks is going to be, will McCarthy cede some of his speakership powers over to folks in the Freedom Caucus in return for getting their vote to be speaker on January 3rd. This could be what I hope to see. And I don't know, John, you were talking about the legislative processes. I'm really hopeful that more than anything, that we actually just see this old thing called regular order happen in the House. I mean, can you guys tell me the last time we actually had, a committee write a bill that was debated and marked up and sent to the floor and amended again, and then went to a conference committee with the Senate, and then went back and then went again? I mean, this doesn't even happen. Like, people disappear into their leader's office and they write a 4,000-page bill, and then they release it and then ask everybody to vote for it 4 hours later. And then one chamber sends it to the other, who rubber stamps it, and everybody leaves town. I don't know, John, if you share that view, but
yeah, absolutely. And this is the interesting political question. And you're our political expert today. We would love to see regular order. We would love to see, tone it down, bring back the norms and standards of democracy, show us that you can govern. Just mind the damn store. Don't send us off on some new crusade. Mind the damn store correctly. But this country we haven't operated according to our own budget rules for decades. No serious country does things this way. Last minute, just continuing resolution, we're going to spend whatever we can. The debt, let me put in 2 bits on the debt limit. It is an immense fallacy that if the US hits the debt limit, we must default on our debt. And one that I think is shockingly irresponsible for our Treasury secretaries from both parties to pass on. When we hit the debt limit, it is perfectly possible for the government to say, no, we're going to honor our debts first, and we're going to cut Social Security payments if we have to, rather than bondholders. But if you want, it is budget possible. There is nothing in budget arithmetic that says that you have to threaten a default on US debt. And as we're heading to inflation and people beginning to worry about US debt, saying that's sacrosanct would help. But yes, regular order, let's mind the store correctly. Let us follow a budget process so that, for example, the military can plan, oh yeah, we'll put in this new weapon system. And by the way, you'll buy us over 5 years, you'll buy us enough ammunition so we can actually use it and count on it and promise to our suppliers it's going to be there. Back to the agencies for a minute, what I watch, it's the other political question. Is this going to resonate with the voters? So the CDC and the FDA completely blew it on the pandemic. Well, any normal country has an investigation, which can be bipartisan. It says, what went wrong? How can we learn next time to do this right? If it's a pandemic like this, or maybe if it's a worse pandemic, which may well happen. The agencies, I watch economic agencies, for example, this whole effort to kill fossil fuels through financial regulation. That's going on. Well, that just needs exposure to sunlight and air and us peasants with pitchforks to figure out what's going on. But it's not clear, can a congressperson get into these weeds, clean something like that up, and hope to win re-election?
Mm-hmm. Kim?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes. Absolutely. Of course they can. No, I mean, this is the anti-lesson of this election, right? Which is, if you're going to go out and you're going to look backward and you're going to kind of meditate on the last election and who didn't win and whether or not there were shenanigans, and then all you're going to do is complain about Joe Biden and the White House and inflation, and you're not going to go out and be able to tell anybody what you are plan to do and how that's going to positively affect their lives, then you're not going to win. By the way, we did have, conservatives did have victories last Tuesday, some really important victories last Tuesday. And they just happen to all be done by people who did positively affect people's lives by governing in a very good fashion. Look at what happened down in Florida with Ron DeSantis. And by the way, if people have not dwelled into those numbers, they are astonishing. It's not just that he won by 20 points. He basically won every demographic, okay? Older voters, independents, suburbanites, women, Hispanics. He pretty much won every demographic other than African Americans and young people. Okay,
but big increases with African Americans,
and huge increases. But here's the other one that just is amazing to me, and again, a contrast to what you saw in so many other places in the country. Ron DeSantis won 69% of the rural vote, 58% of the suburban vote. Okay, by the way, which is the place where Republicans basically lost elections the last couple of times around, and 55% of the urban vote.
That's right. Also, Kim, you look at the voter registration numbers in Florida. So DeSantis's numbers are about the same as Gavin Newsom in terms of overall vote. Voter registration in California, Kim, 2-1 Democratic. Voter registration in Florida, I think Republicans have about a 3-point edge last time I checked. So this is impressive. Kim, I'd like to switch to 2 topics where in theory there could be action in Congress and maybe even consensus. Let's start with the war in Ukraine. HR, I want to get your thoughts on this. The news this week, Russia has abandoned the city of Kherson. Zelensky hails this as, quote, the beginning of the end of the war. HR, I want you to elaborate on that, true or false. But Kim, getting back to the Potomac Watch, if you will, Joe Biden, before he went abroad, said that after the midterm election, he'd like to hold a bipartisan meeting at the White House to discuss, in his words, quote, how to advance the economic and national security priorities of the United States. So HR, first of all, is this the end of the war? And then secondly, if you were a fly on the wall or you're part of that conversation at the White House about what the security priorities are for the U.S., what would you offer?
Well, I'll tell you, I think that this is the beginning of the end, as Zelensky said, but that it may take a couple of years, right, to actually get to the end, even longer potentially, because as Russia showed after Ukrainians retook Kherson, after the evacuation of the Russians from Kherson, this volley of missiles that landed last night in Kyiv, murdering more innocent civilians. Right. Russia's determined, right, to use these long-range fires to try to affect Ukrainian will. Of course, I think the effect is going to be the opposite of that, and the war is going to go on. So in terms of defense priorities, I think it's related to that first question of what happens in the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing we should do is lift all these restrictions on the weapons that we're providing to the Ukrainians so they can fight to win. The statements that you've seen recently about, we have to leave something on Putin's plate, or maybe it's time to talk with Putin now, I think are delusional, because Putin will not stop this war until he believes that he has been defeated. And it's extremely important, I think, at this stage, especially as these missiles landed in Poland and so forth, for us to provide the Ukrainians with the long-range fires capabilities, because again, to defend their population, you have to kill the archer as well as be able to shoot down the arrows, expedite the intermediate range air defense capabilities, and then, of course, provide long-range surveillance as a system approach to this problem set of the long-range fires, the drones that are coming from the Iranians, the missiles that are probably soon to come from the Iranians as well. And then offensive capabilities. And this is why I think this talk of maybe haven't they achieved enough? It's getting cold there now. Maybe the offensive should stop. Actually, that's the best time to attack when the ground is frozen. And the Russians, by the way, many of whom don't even have winter coats, right? I mean, this is the perfect time to continue the offensive. So provide the Ukrainians with the protected mobility and the mobile protected firepower that they need, because I think they've shown they have the valor, they have the will. And I think this is important to our own security. We have to explain this to the American people. When people got upset and worried about, Putin rattling his nuclear saber, guess what? He wouldn't have been doing that if this war didn't begin at all, right? Or if there wasn't a renewed offensive in February 24th. How could that have been prevented? By providing the Ukrainians with defensive capabilities that would have convinced Putin that he can accomplish his objectives through the use of force. So, hey, I think Ukraine's security is related to ours, Bill. I think if our will breaks, what is Xi Jinping going to say? Hey, he's going to say, Vladimir, we were right. The West really is weak. It really is this new era of international relations with us in charge.
Well, I'm discouraged to hear us talking already. Oh, we need to negotiate. And I had this from last week too. We're forgetting this isn't the war about the Ukrainians. This is a war about us. This is a war about the West. You fight now, or you're fighting in Poland, which we might be. And that it really rankles me about, well, he can have Crimea. Let's talk about the 2014 things. This is in 1994, the U.S. said, give up your nuclear weapons. We guarantee your territorial integrity. Now, was that just the first of many lines in the sand by which we slowly give up and negotiate? Or do we actually mean something? So you can't just say, well, you get to pick and choose this part and that part, and you can have some of it. It keeps you happy. No. And this is not a war for Ukraine. This is a war for us, and we need to take that seriously. Now, Ukraine, I worry about them because they're so dependent on us, and we're already starting to talk about this stuff. Their economy is in trouble. So I guess questions, if I were Ukraine, I would be wanting to start building up that economy as much as possible. And they're sort of set to be a new Israel, a new high-tech defense, and a new Ireland, the low-tax entrepreneurial spot of Europe. Can they start that going? Could they start investing? I'm very surprised they're not borrowing more money. They're dependent on us for gifts, but invest in the new Ukraine. That's how governments usually fight wars. They borrow. That would seem like a fairly good way of selling bonds in the West. And I, if I were them, would be looking at these. I would not want my whole defense to depend on HIMARS from the U.S. And if Turkey can make drones, the Ukrainians can make drones. And if I were them, I would be stealing intellectual property. If I can use this thing we talk about on the show, I'd be dismantling those HIMARS, figuring out how to build them as fast.
No, hey, can I interject quickly here and then maybe ask Kim to comment on this with a follow-on question. They are doing that. The Ukrainians are, and you've seen some of these drones. I mean, they've used like engines from Ski-Doos and stuff to create these ocean-based drones that attacked the Russian fleet in Sebastopol. So they are making their own drones as well. I mean at a large scale. and they're innovating in other ways that may not even want to talk about publicly.
Yeah.
So, but I think they're, but they're doing that. But you're right, and this is, and Kim, Neil, because he's not here, I'll just refer to his Bloomberg piece a few weeks ago, where he made the point that John's making is we do need to take a long-term approach to this war from a financial and economic perspective, because it is a long-term war. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And then also, what is your read of the election again, in terms of, has this neo-isolationist sentiment that you see present in some parts of the Republican Party, do you see that gaining strength, losing strength? Do you think the consensus to support Ukraine, do you think that's going to hold in the new Congress?
So first of all, I agree with you. We need to take a long-term approach, because I think that our failure to have done so has been our mistake so far in this endeavor. And I'm speaking primarily of Joe Biden here. For all he goes out and says that he's rallied the world and kept a coalition together, my read is that he's been very reluctant to lead on this. It's not an issue he wanted. He'd far more rather be focused on something else. And if you look, and you've covered this from a congressional perspective, Congress on both sides of the aisle have been pushing and pushing and pushing the White House since February to provide more equipment to the Ukrainians for the long term, right? And the argument from the administration is, well, they don't know how to run it, and it'll take too long to train them. Well, if we'd have got some of them up and running on some of this equipment back in February, they would be operating it at this point. The notion that it was all going to get done in a month. And so I think the sooner that we all adopt that mentality, that this is going to be a sort of long run thing that we need to do, the better we're going to be able to help Ukraine get there. I am still pretty confident about Republicans in the House and in the Senate in terms of holding their support for this. Yes, there are some very prominent voices that have kind of joined, I guess you can call it populism, or sometimes the America First crowd. I wouldn't call it sort of true isolationism, because I have to be honest with you, I think it's a little bit more craven than that. People who are sort of true isolationists often have a better rationale than some of the folks that I've seen out there making some of these arguments for why we shouldn't engage or only engage in certain places. We're going to get a couple more people like that in the House and the Senate, prominently J.D. Vance from Ohio. And he's going to, but I think the good news is that he joins a pretty limited caucus, and most people have remained very responsible. Even I would note some senators that they kind of dabble in that populism in other areas. And an example I would give would be like Marco Rubio, for instance. When it comes to sort of the child care tax credit, he's not where I am in terms of conservative principle, but he's been good on some of these issues internationally. So I'm hopeful that those voices prevail. I don't know. What do you guys think?
But let me give them, there's a point to the isolationists, which is for the last 20, 30 years, pretty much everything we did internationally has been a disaster. And so they kind of say, well, how do you know, and each time you say, yeah, those were disasters, but this time, send in the Marines, it'll turn out right. And, say they have a reason for skepticism. Most recently, Afghanistan, and it's remarkable how little political cost. 1 year ago, an absolute bloody disaster. We spent $1 trillion in Afghanistan, and we're worried about 20, 30 billion in Ukraine. But where was the political cost for losing Afghanistan? And I worry they might say, well, therefore, let the Russians invade. Who cares? Where's the political cost for losing Ukraine and taking one step back on losing the whole West?
Well, the political cost might come in 2024 when Biden's on the ballot. But HR, I want to push back on this question. If you're invited to this big bipartisan meeting at the White House, or the president gets a nice photo op looking responsible, kumbaya moment, what are the security priorities of the United States? In other words, what do you want resolved in that meeting?
Well, I think there are three big ones, right? And I mentioned defense already, to address the bow wave of defense modernization, to strengthen our military capacity, to ensure that we have forward positioned, capable joint forces that are capable of operating at sufficient scale and for ample duration to convince potential enemies they can't accomplish their objectives through the use of force, and obviously to do so as part of alliances and bilateral security arrangements and so forth. The second big area, I would say, would be in the area of energy security. We see that with the recent destruction of another pipeline. And then what I would emphasize is the need to integrate energy security with national security and efforts to reduce man-made carbon emissions, because what we're doing now makes no sense, right? I mean, we canceled a Canadian pipeline, but we greenlighted a Russian one. Then we impeded, as John already alluded to, any kind of investments in our own energy infrastructure, where we could be part of the solution to the global energy problem set. And then we begged the Venezuelans and the Iranians, to export more gas and oil. How does that make any sense? We say that we want to reduce carbon emissions, but guess what everybody's doing now, because of the idiocy of our policies in large measure, is they're burning more coal, right, and emitting more. I mean, so how about just doing what makes sense and investing in our own energy infrastructure, as well as next generation capabilities like EM² nuclear reactors and as well as renewables and so forth. The third big area is on supply chain resilience, and I think we can all say, and I mean, we can shed a tear for it, John, if you want, but I mean, hey, unchecked globalization's over, brother. It's over. And so all the assumptions on which these very fragile but efficient supply chains are based are gone. And so I think supply chain resilience overall in key areas, like battery manufacturing, for example, magnets, upstream components, for the equipment and hardware essential to the energy transition, including minerals and so forth. And of course, a big part of that is going to be permitting and deregulation. So these are all things that that President Biden and the people around him would not want to hear, but I think that those are the sensible areas of national security that we have to really work on as a priority. But I don't see, maybe Kim, you see some progress in these areas, but I see halting progress at best.
No, we had an administration which almost pretty much on day one moved to reverse the reforms that the Trump administration had made on the National Environmental Policy Act, which was designed to speed up those permits and let business get out there and actually deal with some of those problems you just pointed out. And I'm glad you mentioned the supply chain aspect, because we talk a lot here about energy resources, but just as important are mineral resources. I mean, this country is also just abundant in mining resources, but it has been, along with energy, shut down by environmental activists and targeted equally by this administration as fossil fuels have been. And we're going to have to completely rethink that.
Well, I got to put in my 2 words for free economics here, because nothing like a military guy who to bring. I
know, man. You guys are gonna rescind my college credit in economics.
No. You just that's actually.
But you can have free markets and mining in this country as well.
Actually, no. So here. There's a lot of steps where we just need to get the heck out of the way. And so energy and mining, just get out of the way. Stop shooting yourself in the foot is lower. Now, when you start telling me you want to run the quest for global economic supremacy and make sure our supply chain for dog squeaky toys doesn't rely on too many Chinese people, then I get, if it's really.
I'm not saying that, John. I'm not saying that. I mean, I think dog toys are okay. Dog toys are okay.
Well, 99% of what we import from China is on the level of dog toys. So, if you really want to do that, identify what is militarily important and put it on the defense budget, and then I'll be a lot happier. But otherwise, you're going down a big trap. And let me remind you, with China, we are still at the point of deterrence, not war fighting. Our job with China is to convince them not to invade Taiwan. The kind of deterrence by the way, that was the hugest failure in Ukraine. We were supposed to be deterring Putin from invading, and for example, Afghanistan lost that deterrence. We want China to see that invading Taiwan will hurt it, not just because we're going to shoot back hard, but because it's going to cost it a lot. And so trying to cut it, fighting the war now by trying to cut it off completely from the global economy is a mistake if your effort is to deter them from starting that war.
Can I also, just not to pile on the general, but
I need help.
Neil's not here, Kim, please. That's typically what
the supply chain thing too also becomes an excuse for all kinds of very bad policy. So I know you were maybe giving a half-hearted defense of the CHIPS Act, but that was the hook that Congress used to end up passing about $500 billion worth of terrible pork and and by the way, the vast majority of that money ended up going to government agencies, like for new studies on manufacturing and joint projects with American industry. But that's how it was sold to everybody. It's, oh, we really need to do something to make sure we strengthen our supply chains. And, and I think that was probably like 30 cents worth of the bill. And then the rest of it was horrible, industrial, straight up.
Well, this reinforces your point on regular order, because, that bill started as the America Competes Act in the Senate under Senator Risch. And our team here, we helped support their staff in drafting it. It was a very sensible act, right? It goes over to the House. It gets all this pork, shoveled into it. And where it died because of that. There's too much pork for anybody to take it seriously. So that was whittled down a little bit, but it's an example of a missed opportunity, I think. It addressed the problem of really unacceptable risk associated with the semiconductor supply chain. I think we would all recognize that if China were to blockade Taiwan or invade Taiwan today, the result would be a major global depression. Right, because of the way that supply chain has become almost wholly, reliant on TSMC chips manufactured in Taiwan. So there was an element of it that I think was important. But I agree with you that there's a lot of pork in that bill. The other thing I would say is that to John's point, I agree. We're not fighting the war with China now. I think what we would hope is that a Chinese leader, because I don't think Xi Jinping is ever going to realizes that China can have enough of the China dream, enough of the vision of national rejuvenation without pursuing that vision at our expense, without trying to rewrite the rules of international engagement and the international order from an economic, a financial, and a security perspective, or redefining what human rights is and so forth. This massive agenda that they have. So, I'm not. I don't want you guys to think, or our viewers to think, that's not the objective. I think with competing with China.
So Kim, I have breaking news for you. Sorry, HR. Kevin McCarthy survived his speaker vote within the caucus. The Wall Street Journal's reporting, so it's not fake news. The vote was 188 to 31. If you're curious, I'd like
what
to
was it again? Sorry.
188 to 31. I'd like to shift now into crypto, John. Okay, quickly.
Okay, quick. Well, I don't know. You'll decide whether it needs to be good. We've talked too much about the Republicans. What will the Democrats do now? They may not have Joe Manchin to save them anymore in the Senate. They have executive orders. They have the capacity to confirm a lot of judges. As we talked about how the Republicans need to show that they're capable of governing and sort of exercise the Trump demon. Democrats, are they going to find competence and leadership, regular order, save themselves from their extreme progressive tendencies?
Is this right? No, that's your short answer.
Well, Bill wanted a short answer.
Well, it is a short answer, but let me segue this into our next topic, Kim. What are Democrats going to do on cryptocurrency? Because right now there is the spectacle. Someone's going to be very popular in your newspaper, Sam Bankman-Fried, and the tragedy that is FTX. Question, Kim, is he going to become to cryptocurrency what Elizabeth Holmes was to medical testing? But secondly, it's a question for you, John, as well. How is Congress going to investigate cryptocurrency? The phrase you hear around DC right now is we need to put quote unquote guardrails on it. But Kim, what is the fine line between guardrails and overregulation? And John, where do you think both Democrats and Republicans should pursue? And I mention this because SBF has given a lot of money to Democrats. I'm curious how the Senate handles him.
Well, let's just say this story has got a lot of legs and it's got a long way to go. People are going to be unraveling it for a very long time. I would just point out, though, that in some ways, what actually happened was sort of your classic financial panic and run on a company, as it were. And so I don't think, as long as it doesn't look as though there's any contagion heading over into the banking sector, I don't think that we need to kind of freak out about it too much in terms of what happened. I do think that there's going to be some really interesting details about this guy and the fascinating way in which he had structured all of these companies and what exactly was going on there. But I don't think that this is necessarily something that from a more macro or perspective we have to be too concerned about. Now, that being said, I do think Democrats are going to use this as an excuse to do what we've been doing up to now, which I think is the wrong approach. You saw Elizabeth Warren. She's always a very good kind of tip in what the direction is headed. saying that this was a call for the SEC's Gary Gensler to crack down even more in enforcement activity. And this is what Democrats have wanted to do, is just govern by enforcement, as it were. Have the SEC go after this company or that company and crack down on them. The problem is that there's no clear set of rules. And that was one of the questions I had. She's like, we need to have the SEC go after these guys for breaking the rules. I was like, what rules? This is the problem. So we were just talking about Washington governance. I think that there needs to be potentially a very basic set of clear rules that explain a few things, mostly in terms of transparency. This is one of the problems with FTX is you didn't really know what was going on because, this was a very opaque outfit to a degree that many other financial institutions would not get away with, right? So I think you need a few rules of the road in that regard, but ones that are written by Congress and not Gary Gensler, off in his SEC tower setting kind of ad hoc rules for the cryptocurrency market as we go along.
So let me offer a couple of thoughts. Yes, this is going to be a cause of some very embarrassing photographs of prominent, mostly Democrats being taken. And I'm sure they're trying to get rid of those. But to the point of what happened and regulation, let's remember, this was not crypto. This was an exchange in the Bahamas. And the reason it was in the Bahamas was precisely to avoid U.S. regulation. So it's not clear you need to strengthen U.S. regulation when the whole thing blew up in the Bahamas, because U.S. regulation already prohibits this sort of thing. Second, this wasn't really a run. This was classic fraud. What happened basically was just the classic use of customer money. An exchange, if it's really an exchange, cannot go bankrupt because you go there, you buy your crypto, and it's your crypto. And it's done. It's just like you go to Whole Foods and you buy your kale and arugula. It's your kale and arugula. Sorry, I live in Palo Alto. So now what happened?
As long as you didn't use crudité, like the failed Senate candidate in Pennsylvania.
It was not
and
an
there's
exchange.
that veggie tray, people. So
it was closer to a broker dealer in that they were using your stuff. It wasn't yours. They were using yours as collateral to lend and other stuff. And it was actually just a fraud. They used your investment and they used that to finance all sorts of other stuff, and it wasn't there. So this is nothing. Most of crypto is interesting technology, but very old-fashioned finance. And for 400 years, people take your money and then fraudulently use it for something else has been a source of explosions. I would also add, in a sense, it's not about crypto, and it is about crypto. So it's just classic fraud, using customer money when you're not supposed to be using customer money. The fact that it was crypto, in fact, but it does show two big problems with crypto. The whole point of crypto was you're not supposed to need exchanges. Why are you going to an exchange to buy crypto? The whole point was it's just on your wallet. It's peer-to-peer. We don't need any of this stuff. Well, apparently not. So it was all the classic stuff that you do wrong on exchanges and leverage and using customer money went on. But it went on because crypto wasn't working for what crypto was supposed to work for. And it is also true that the underlying asset, you can do this with mortgages, you can do this with tulip bulbs. The underlying asset in all these cases were tokens that had no fundamental value. And fiat money that is completely unbacked eventually goes to its natural, and has substitutes, goes to its natural value of zero. So that it was built on an asset that had no fundamental value didn't help whatsoever. Now, crypto can still exist. Backed tokens are still an interesting technology. They turn out not to be as great and liquid as we thought, so you're buying them through exchanges. So it's not really having that much to do with crypto. It's just classic financial fraud.
HR, maybe the lesson here is also don't take financial advice from celebrities. It was just a few months ago that Matt Damon was on Super Bowl commercials telling us that fortune favors the brave. I wonder if he got paid in crypto, by the way, for doing that.
And certainly don't listen to any economic advice from washed up generals. So, I mean, of course, I defer to John and all this stuff. But
you guys just sold a lot of insurance on Fox News. But go ahead.
If they're registered in the Bahamas, there's a reason they're registered in the Bahamas. So caveat emptor here.
Neither of you are into crypto. Not crypto investors here. Okay.
This is where we need Neil. Neil's been the biggest champion of crypto.
Well, we should be, to be honest, I used to be a finance professor and I should be massively short given my written comments on it. And I'm not, but that's just because I'm lazy.
Okay. Can we have about 10 minutes left in the show? I want to squeeze in one more segment here. Something hits home to the three of us here in Palo Alto because it's about an hour to the north of us. And that's the fun and games at Twitter. And I imagine every day you take great delight in reading this as I do, because my goodness, there is more snowflake content here than there is in the Sierra snowpack right now. We have the delight of Elon Musk trolling AOC and Hillary Clinton. He must delight in just always getting in these fights with these just incredibly joyless people with no sense of humor. And then you look inside Twitter and there are people that just absolutely ripped up Kim because their free lunches are being taken away. You probably saw the story about the Twitter employee who was so whipped out of shape that she threw up in a garbage can. They were crying at their Halloween party. So there's a lot of fun and games going on here, and it just really does confirm a lot of the silliness of the tech sector. But the question, Kim, is really, what is Musk doing here, and what, outside of just having the delight of trolling people, what is Twitter's future? I see stories about video games. I see stories about him wanting to create a super app, but he's got $44 billion at stake here. What do you think he wants to achieve?
Look, I think that there's what Musk is trying to do, which I really admire, by the way. The overall idea of what Musk is trying to do is something that is very important that we should support, which is that he is attempting to use the free market, or rather himself as an entrepreneur, to reroute and change the direction of a product that he believes is immensely important to speech in the country and as a public forum. And I really hope he succeeds, because we need more of this rather than a default every time to regulators in Washington needing to take care of this thing that big tech did or that thing that big tech did. How awesome that, like, we have a billionaire who's like, I'm going to fix Twitter. I really hope he manages to do it. Now, doing that is much harder. Twitter is really underperforming. It needs to add a lot of users. It needs to rethink its business model and the way it does it. But you know what? If there's a guy that's got some pretty interesting, innovative ideas on stuff, he's got a pretty good track record, right? Like, he's in space, he's drilling underground. I mean, he doesn't have a little brain. So, I think it's going to take him some time to maybe clear out some of the hysterical weepers at the country and the company, and sort of get in some new, minds and thoughts. Maybe they move to another state. That'd be cool too. But I think he's got as much of an opportunity to do something useful with his company as anyone else. What about you guys? By the way, does everyone now get up and now go and read Elon Musk every day on Twitter? Because I did.
Well, the first question I have to the group is, what are you going to do about your blue checks?
I have a blue check.
You got a blue check.
I do have a blue check because there were, I think, scores of people pretending to be me, so they helped me get a blue check. But I do think that this is positive, Kim. I mean, in terms of somebody who wants to fix it, and I hope that he brings in people like Tristan Harris. I don't know if you know his work at the Center for Responsible Technology, because I think that these social media is doing something to us that is to some degree unprecedented in terms of the drive toward polarization, the whole idea of monetizing more clicks to get more advertising dollars, and doing that by these algorithms which we don't really understand, that show people more and more extreme and often false content, right? So I'm concerned about our confidence in our common identity as Americans and our confidence in our democratic processes and institutions. So I'm glad to see it. I hope he can pull it off. I don't really know what he plans to do. I'm not an expert on any of this, but I'll be watching it closely and reading about it as much of it as I can. And I hope that other voices like Tristan Harris's, have a big impact on what his approach is.
Can I just throw one last thing? I mean, one of the things I actually think is really interesting is he's floated the idea of maybe people can kind of use filters or things to sign up for different experiences on Twitter. And I just think that matters, because I think that maybe you sign up for the experience where you're not getting all the flame speech and the hate speech and which is what makes Twitter so toxic. And, because unfortunately there's just too many people who have too much time to troll everybody else online. And that's what makes it such a miserable place. I hate getting on it right now. I kind of have to for work, but it's not pleasant.
John?
So I want to channel HR about being the optimist about this one too. So the Twitter, the free speech aspect, I think is incredibly important. And Twitter as a sort of a global single place where you can learn stuff. I've learned, and all of us have learned stuff about Ukraine, stuff about energy, stuff about COVID policy that came up. Heresies were allowed to come up on Twitter, and we all learned from them from all sorts of different fields. If we all go to Mastodon and live in our little bubbles, we're never going to get that global town square. But the content moderation was barred. The news that Twitter was coordinating and Facebook were coordinating with the White House on what kinds of views needed to be banned. That's China stuff. And I agree. I can listen to all sorts of stuff. I let the user figure out what they want. Now, how does this end up? I'm optimistic as you are, but in a couple different ways. It could end up being the great WhatsApp, the payments vision that he had, not crypto, by the way, but seamless integrated payments. Maybe he can make that work in a way that it's never worked. The other possibility, though, is that rather than billions of users and becoming the single great app, it goes through Chapter 11. We wait, $44 billion bucks goes down the drain. But then you don't have to have huge ad revenues to support the massive amount of debt. You could have a simple app that is just the Twitter you pay $8 to use, and there isn't a ton of ads, and that is focused on just being the town square and isn't trying to be the next great tech app of everything. So that's optimistic. And the third piece of optimism is it proves once again the great, I don't like to use the word lie, but the great, the fallacy of, the big internet monopolies that need the government to come and tear them apart. Let's see. Facebook, how you doing these days? We were joking before the show about how Yahoo, Netscape, and AOL have it all wrapped up. Well, the free market can take apart monopolies remarkably quickly. So this remains a very contested space, which is all great too.
So Kim, a question for you. When in doubt, I always go back to The Simpsons. The Simpsons just seem to be eerily predictive and just have their finger on the pulse. There's actually a very clever column right after the election, which is a side-by-side of quotes by Elon Musk and Montgomery Burns. You figure who said what. I remember an episode years and years ago where the incredibly shady lawyer Lyle Hutz is going over a case, and he goes, "Can you
imagine a world without lawyers?"
And then they cut to a scene where people are dancing around, holding hands in a field of wildflowers, like the old Coca-Cola commercial. Here's the question: what if Elon Musk just pulled the plug on Twitter tomorrow and killed it? What would the world look like?
Well, even he would be a much poorer man. A lot of people would be a lot poorer. But yeah, I mean, I agree with John. I think that there's has been an underrated but immense value of all these voices being together and then playing off each other as well too, to find out information. I mean, I was stunning as someone who had to, for my sins, write a lot over the last few years about the whole Russia collusion hoax. As
brilliantly done, may I say.
Thank you. As Special Counsel John Durham was doing this, and he would put out these indictments or the speaking sort of indictments and all of the court documents, and people would be referred to as person B and business person C. It took Twitter about 20 minutes to unravel who everybody was in all of those documents, an immense amount of information and sleuthing, the kind of, it's sort of an extraordinary thing to see, like a joint brain, right? Someone saying, well, what about this? And what about this? And it was extraordinary. And I've seen that happen a number of times. So I think there's a real value to it in that way. So in that regard, I think it would probably be bad if it was gone. But I do think I agree with HR. I think we have to, look, I have 3 kids. We need to rethink how technology and social media and VR and all of it plays into our lives. Like, we have a rule in my house. I'm like, if I see you texting to one another while you're in the same room, I will take that device away and you will never see it again. I'll just run over it with the backhoe. Like, you won't ever have it, So, but we have to kind of, this is like something that my parents didn't have to worry about. They had different worries, but we need to teach subsequent generations about the limits and appropriate uses of social media to stop some of the toxicity of today.
And we're focusing on Twitter, but we ought to talk at some point too, and just recognize that there are other platforms out there. There are problems. I mean, I think TikTok, for example, and the way that, it can almost like reprogram people's brains, in terms of, and again, an algorithm that's not understood, information that's being gathered, as well as another issue, in terms of, people actually becoming the product themselves.
So should it be banned?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've got to think more about it, read more about it, understand it better. But I just don't know.
We have a rule: no passive voice on this program. It be banned by who? By our government? I'm not so sure I want our government in charge of what gets banned. So I like the idea of set up your own filters. I like if I'm going to have one regulation, it might be you have to use your true identity and be verified who you are, at least in a marketplace. That there's your sacred honor, your reputation is one useful thing to keep people from spewing other stuff. But otherwise, say what you want, and if you don't like it, toughen up or set some filters so you don't have to listen to it. But we don't silence anyone.
Okay, I'm going to go passive one last time. And also, it be the last few minutes of the show. So let's go around the horn very quickly. Based on what happened last week, John Cochrane, do you feel better or worse about American democracy? And I think you feel better.
I feel better, yes. Now's the chances at least for the Republicans. You got to face it, guys. Are you going to get serious and deserve it, which you, in the DeSantis mold, you evidently have the possibility to do? Or are you going to go down in flames for another generation?
HR, you always find a way to feel better.
Hey, I feel better. How can you not feel better, right? We have a say in how we're governed, right? And I think that what's happened in recent years is this lack of confidence in our democratic processes. And I think what you see is maybe the first steps toward regaining confidence. And we talk a lot, and we should, about the assault on the Capitol on January 6th and election deniers among Republicans. But we have to remember that Stacey Abrams was defeated, another election denier. So I think that hopefully politicians recognize now that it is not right to compromise really our principles to score partisan political points. And not only is it not right, but you'll pay the price for it if you do it. So, I feel a lot more confident. And but you know what? And Kim, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. I still see a lot of these panels, like at other think tanks, about our political crisis. And I'm like, what political crisis are you talking about? So I think there's still a good deal of self-flagellation going on that goes beyond genuine and appropriate concern for our institutions.
The middle held is common sense held. It's so much for at least the electorate is immensely polarized. Yeah.
Kim, you got the last word. You got the last word.
Well, thank you. And by the way, beforehand, let me just tell you what a delight it was to be with such smart people on this show.
Who needs Niall Ferguson?
What was not on the ballot last week, as much as the White House wanted to say, democracy was not on the ballot. Okay, we went and we participated in an electoral process. We're still waiting for some dysfunctional states like California to figure out how to finish tallying their votes. And I'm sorry, all three of you live there. I really am. But anyway,
Hey, Kim, you got to go. You're freezing in Alaska. You tell us you feel sorry for us in California.
We have heat. It's good.
But what you say is we become the proverbial. We used to be the destination for America. We now become the proverbial nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. But Kim, go ahead and complete your thought.
Yeah, so that wasn't on the ballot. A couple of things. Look, I do think that there was a lot of concern by independent and moderate voters about some of the candidates who ran, who made them feel uncomfortable. That I think was something that did play. And I think there was a lot of discussion in a country that was very rattled, still in an upheaval over the Dobbs decision that was issued in June. And that we're still going to have to sort through in a federalist perspective, which, by the way, I'm happy to hear. But here's why I feel good is that if it's true that Republicans take back the House, the country will be safe for the next 2 years from some of the worst progressive ideas that were out there that were still very much a potentiality to go through. So there's that. I think also that thanks to the prior administration and the Senate, we now have a Supreme Court that is going to look dimly on an executive branch that attempts to pass any of those programs through executive fiat. If you didn't see, the Eighth Circuit just put its stop on the student loan program that the administration put out. So I think we should feel really happy about that. And also, look, I think the conservative moment had a little wake-up call Tuesday and is suddenly in a position where it might be able to look a little bit more clearly about all of its options that are out there and what path it might want to go down in the future.
Kim, if you relocate, forget California, you might want to go to Florida. There's not only the big announcement maybe happening in a few hours in Palm Beach, we'll find out. There's also what happens in Tallahassee with the governor. And now breaking news, Florida Senator Rick Scott Kim just announced he's going to challenge Mitch McConnell. He did so in a closed-door GOP lunch. So you're going to be very busy in the next few weeks.
Is that actually true?
It's actually true. He's going to take him on.
Well, you know what? We had an editorial this morning that said, quit griping. If you're going to challenge someone, stand up and challenge them and then have the vote, and then the winner take all and the losers get behind them. So great.
People read your newspaper. Congratulations. Kim, this is great fun. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you. Thanks guys.
Kim.
Hey,
That's
thanks,
it for
Kim.
That's it for this episode of GoodFellows. We'll be back after the Thanksgiving break, so hang in there. We'll be back soon. On behalf of my colleagues, John Cochrane, HR McMaster, the missing Niall Ferguson, all of us here at the Hoover Institution, our very special guest today, Kimberly Strassel. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed this show and are interested in watching more content featuring HR McMaster, watch Battlegrounds, also available at hoover.org.